Fox News alert, we're awaiting an announcement from President Trump on the Iran nuclear deal. He is going to say he is not recertifying it. We're told he will give a harsh critique of the 2015 agreement and say it is not in our national interest. But he'll stop short of scrapping the accord entirely, leaving it up to Congress to decide what, if anything, to do next. This is a Friday edition of Outnumbered, everybody. I'm Sandra Smith, and here today is Harris Faulkner, former deputy spokesperson for the State Department, Marie Harf, Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Lisa Booth. And today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, we're lucky to have him. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich is here, and he, by the way, also has a New York Times best-selling author of the new novel Vengeance, and he is outnumbered. Great to have you back.
Great to be back. Yeah. Great to be with all of you.
Boy, this is such a huge day.
Yeah.
I mean, with Iran, the president was at the Value Summit. I mean, this is just a huge
It's a huge day, and it's a huge week. Here we go. President Trump is going to make his long-awaited announcement on the Iran nuclear deal shortly. We're told he is not going to recertify the agreement and will outline why he feels Tehran is not complying with the deal. Mr. Trump mentioned his plans earlier today.
We are returning moral clarity to our view of the world and the many grave challenges we face. This afternoon, in a little while, I'll be giving a speech on Iran, a terrorist nation like few others, and I think you're going to find it very interesting.
Let's go live to Chief White House correspondent John Roberts. John?
And Sandra, just reading some of the provisions of a fix to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that Senators Corker, Cotton, and Rubio are working on. I'll get you some of the details of that in just a second. But first of all, let's talk about what the president is expected to do in about 45 minutes when he gives that speech. He is not going to recertify what's called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That's the Iran nuclear deal under the provisions of INARA. This was the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act that was passed by Congress in 2015. It requires presidential recertification of the Iran nuclear deal every 90 days. The big problem that the president has with this nuclear deal is it covers the nuclear program, but not the other things that Iran is doing to promote instability in the Middle East. Not recertifying this on the part of the president does not scrap our involvement in the Iran nuclear deal. What it does is it triggers a 60-day review period by Congress. Now, in his speech today, the president will lay out and ask Congress to approve a comprehensive plan of action to get tough on Iran's bad behavior. According to the White House, that plan will, quote, address the totality of these threats from and malign activities by the government of Iran and will seek to bring about change in the Iranian regime's behavior. According to the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Congress basically has three options now in the 60-day review period. It could follow the president's lead with new legislation. It could choose to reimpose sanctions unilaterally, or it could do nothing and just leave the JCPOA in place the way it is. Now, as I mentioned, at least three senators, Senators Corker, Senator Cotton, and Senator Rubio, are working on a fix to the JCPOA that would address what they believe are some of the flaws. Among the things that it would do is it would impose the automatic snapback of U.S. sanctions if Iran violates the deal, but get rid of the sunset provisions, because 8 years into the JCPOA, the penalties begin to sunset. It would also bolster the International Atomic Energy Agency's verification process in overseeing Iran's nuclear program, and that would limit Iran's development of advanced centrifuges. But that addresses only the JCPOA. It doesn't address the broader set of parameters that the president is going to talk about at 12:45. Congress really doesn't know everything that the president is going to propose, so they can't react to it just yet. But we'll see what he has to say as far as how far he wants Congress to go to wrap all of this together so that if Iran continues to engage in its bad behavior and destabilizing activities in the Middle East, it would result in the imposition of U.S. sanctions. Not sure how much of an appetite there is in Congress for that, but we'll see. Sandra?
John Roberts, live at the White House for us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, we wait the announcement. What do you think we'll hear from the president, Speaker?
Look, I think the administration understands that Iran has been our mortal enemy. Just a few weeks ago, the Iranian parliament was adopting a new military bill, financed in part by Barack Obama sending them money, and they were chanting death to America in the parliament. Now, as a historian, I always ask my liberal friends, what do you think the term death to America means? And so, in fact, I have a paper that'll come out tomorrow entitled Death to America, arguing that Trump's doing the right thing. I think he's followed a very good process. I think Secretary Tillerson played a significant role in this, as did Secretary Mattis and the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster. And they really methodically thought this through. And you're going to see a real strategy. And I suspect you're going to see a real target of the Revolutionary Guard and the people who have been the leading terrorists on the planet. And that is going to enrage the Iranians. I mean, they've bluffed Westerners over and over again, starting with Jimmy Carter in 1979. And now, just like the North Koreans, they're running into somebody who's not bluffable.
Yeah, you know, I want to follow up on that because one of my curiosity points today is what will Iran do? Because they are angry about the certification, perhaps, of the Iranian National Revolutionary Guard, rather, as a terrorist organization. There are some things that the president wants to put into place that they are saying that they're very angry about. What does that anger look like? And I wrote it down. What do you think death to America means?
Yeah. Well, look, I think they will try to push us. They may well try to do something against our ships. They may do something in terms of embassies or people, you know. But I think they also have to reflect on the fact they're dealing with an administration. All of the American senior military believes that the Iranians have been killing Americans, that it was Iranian weapons in Iraq, that the Iranians have consistently been anti-American. Of course, it was an Iranian-led effort that killed the Marines in 1982. This is a long fight. So when you have people like Mattis and Kelly and McMaster, they have zero doubt this is a bad regime, and I think we will respond as aggressively as we need to whatever the Iranians do.
Mr. Speaker, you are sitting next to someone, Marie Harf, who was involved in the crafting of this
And I'm really
deal.
interested to see how this goes.
Well, it's interesting. General Mattis also testified publicly that the deal, staying in the deal, is in the U.S. national security interest. So, yes, General Mattis understands the threats from the Iranian regime, but he also has been making the case internally that pulling out of the deal would not be in our national security interest. So, obviously, for the president, this is a very emotional issue. He clearly doesn't like the deal. He's hearing from his administration that on the nuclear side, the Iranians are complying. And he's basically kicking it to Congress. So the key here is what Congress is going to do. And as we've seen this year, Congress hasn't been able to do a whole lot of things. So we'll see what they're able to actually do. They could reimpose sanctions that violate the deal, and then the U.S. would not be in compliance. What they could do, which would probably be smarter, is to target the IRGC with sanctions, target ballistic missiles with more sanctions, things that don't violate the deal but show that they're tough on the Iranian regime. That would be the responsible thing to do. And you know who the person is who's going to be in charge of this process? Bob Corker, the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He has been the one leading the effort on the Iran deal on the Republican side. And I just have to think and wonder how the last few weeks of the president's feud with Corker is going to play into this, if at all. Because pulling out of the deal without anything to replace it, without saying, here's how we will prevent Iran from getting a weapon.
Now you're making an argument of something that's actually not going to happen.
I'm making a congressional argument. If Congress takes steps to pull the U.S. out of the deal, which they can do in the next 60 days.
They can, but nobody's talking about doing that.
Well, some members of Congress actually are talking about doing that. If they do that without a way to prevent Iran from getting a weapon, I think that's the height of irresponsibility.
Let me ask you a question, though.
Yeah.
Because I'm fascinated with this bland assertion. Since the Iranians do not allow any military base to be inspected.
That's not
Exactly.
That's not true under the deal, technically.
It's not true on the deal technically, but the IAEA will not ask them because they've told the IAEA they won't let them come in.
So
Mr. Speaker,
technical
that's also
versus
not true.
reality is
Harris,
where we are.
That's also not true. The IAEA has over and over and over again certified that Iran is complying. If we have actionable intelligence...
They haven't visited the military bases.
We don't have actionable intelligence.
Don't you think you should see the military bases?
Harris, we have to have actionable intelligence under the deal. If we have a cause to get into a site in Iran, we can force
so if they're really good at being sneaky, so we don't have the reason to ask them.
Wait, hold on one second, Lisa. Mr. Speaker, when we had zero inspectors... let me address this
Marie,
comment.
I have not been able to get in here
When we
yet.
had zero inspectors in Iran, we found every one of their hidden sites because American intelligence is really good at this. We have hundreds of inspectors crawling all over the country now.
Let's let Lisa break this up.
The problem is, I think people like Marie and those on the left are going to want to put the criticism on the Trump administration, put the criticism on the United States, but we should be looking at what the Iranians are doing. And it's not the United States who are saying death to the Iranians. It's not the United States that 2 weeks after the deal put Iranian sailors on their knees, pointed guns to their heads, and shot it for propaganda purposes. And the reality
turned it into a statue inside their country.
Well, exactly. And the reality is that the Trump administration has been very critical of the Obama administration for having a myopic view on the Iranians, only looking at the nuclear aspect of this. Meanwhile, we've essentially pumped tens of billions of dollars into their economy, allowed them to purchase and advance their military assets through purchases through the Russians, and also use that money to destabilize the region. So I don't think it's bad for Congress to have to take a closer look. As John Roberts pointed out, Senators Tom Cotton and Rubio are going to introduce an amendment to this. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing
so why
to
does
focus
General
further review.
Wait, let me ask you, Lisa, why does General Mattis then say this is in our national security interest, the deal? And why does General Dunford say the Iranians are upholding their end of it? You respect both of them.
Well, I go back to what Speaker Gingrich said and what a lot of people have said, and the criticism is that the IAEA doesn't have access to military sites. Do we actually know
why does
that
Mattis
they're following through with the deal? So
why
I think
does General Mattis think it's in our interest, though?
Well, I think
you
that is a good question. What I'm saying, Marie, is I think it is not a bad thing for Congress to review this further and to have further discussion.
Okay.
And if there's
ways, let's have Speaker Gingrich weigh in on just that, because there has been.
But notice you're conflating two different things. Mattis has said don't pull out of the deal. The president's not pulling out of the deal.
Right.
So the question is, when we, for example, designate.
Would he if he could?
No. I think what he's doing is actually very clever. I think this has been very well staffed. I think Tillerson and Mattis deserve a lot of credit, and so does McMaster, because they worked the process. We're doing exactly the right thing. We're saying you are not, because if you actually read the Corker legislation, or Corker-Cardin, it says one of the 4 criteria is it in the general national interest? Not just nuclear. Is it in the general national interest? The president's saying, no, it's not. He doesn't pull out of the deal.
That's right.
But he takes steps which may lead the Iranians to go crazy. And if the Congress simply said, one, we're eliminating the 8-year time limit, and 2, we're requiring you to allow us to inspect military facilities without going through some dance about whether or not we found something. But also, I believe this administration is going to designate the Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization, which it clearly is. At that point, the Iranians, who were basically dominated by the Revolutionary Guard, I think are going to go crazy.
Yeah, I think that will be a hinge point, too. I also wonder whether or not others around the world will say, well, is the United States seeking a slippery slope with Hezbollah and others and putting them in our crosshairs with that designation and making our decisions based on the safety of our nation and them being on that list?
Hezbollah is already designated as a foreign territory.
And the point that I am making, back to Marie's question to me, the point I am making is that I don't think it is a bad thing to force a review of the provocations we've seen from the Iranians, basically just since the deal alone. That is what I'm saying. And if we can beef this up, if there's things that Congress can do, so why not have these discussions? It's very important for national security.
Getting back to the Speaker's point, this broad strategy, as the White House lays out in this plan, focuses on neutralizing the government of Iran's destabilizing influence and constraining its aggression, particularly its support for terrorism and militants. But going back to this dispute here, there did seem to be mixed messaging coming from the White House when you just brought up Secretary Mattis, and General Dunford said it is in the best interest of our national security to stay in this deal.
I don't see it as mixed messaging. I really don't. They're not saying that they want to pull out of this deal or decertify based on the fact that they don't want us to have any part in this. What they're saying is if there's a way to make it workable, look, some of our allies are hinged to this deal. They're already doing billions of dollars in business with them. So unless you're going to start to underwrite some of these countries,
say that's not two different messages? I mean,
it is absolute. They're trying to square a circle here. They are, because the president clearly doesn't like the deal, and his advisors, many of them know it's in our national security interest. So they're trying to square a circle by sending it to Congress.
But you ought to be praising him. I mean, he has listened to his advisors. He is making modifications in our strategy. He is getting much tougher with the Iranians, but he's not pulling out of the deal. That seems to me to be exactly a blend of Tillerson and Mattis and Dunford.
I hate putting my hopes on the United States Congress today. That's what makes me nervous.
But that's not what he's doing.
Did we kind of just tee up the president's speech? Did we mention that he's about to speak on justice?
I don't think anyone picked up on that.
A long-awaited announcement coming from the president pretty much any minute now. And, of course, as soon as he begins, we will have his remarks live right here on the Iran deal. We will bring that to you when it starts. Meantime, the president, again, using a scalpel to trim back Obamacare. What he's doing that may mark his biggest move yet in dismantling the health care law.
News alert, as President Trump is expected moments from now to announce the decision that he has made on decertification out of that Iran deal, what that will look like and its details. We've been talking about this hour. You know, it's gotten a bit heated, but we do have some idea of what the president is going to do. The audience, of course, is all of America and the rest of the world, particularly Iran. Because if we make a move to put the Iranian Revolutionary Guard on a terrorist watch list, you can imagine their response. So the implications for all of this are huge. The speech today is very important on this fine Friday from the diplomatic reception room at the White House. As the president steps up to the lectern there, we will bring it to you live here on Fox News.
It may be his biggest move yet toward dismantling Obamacare. A day after paving the way for many Americans to buy cheaper health plans through executive order, President Trump inviting Democrats to fix the Obama health law after announcing his plan to halt subsidies to insurance companies. Trump tweeting this morning, the Democrats' Obamacare is imploding. Massive subsidy payments to their pet insurance companies has stopped. Dems should call me to fix. And the president telling the Values Voter Summit in Washington just a short time ago that he's prepared to do more on his own after Congress failed to act.
One by one, it's going to come down, and we're going to have great health care in our country. We are going to have great health care in our country. We're taking a little different route than we had hoped because getting Congress, they forgot what their pledges were. So we're going a little different route. But you know what? In the end, it's going to be just as effective, and maybe it'll even be better.
Democrats quick to pounce on the president's latest move. Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi calling the president's decision on subsidies, quote, a spiteful act of pointless sabotage. California and New York threatening to sue. And this from former Labor Secretary Robert Reich.
They tried 3 times to repeal and replace. They did not do it. And now Donald Trump is taking it on himself to undermine and subvert the act so that essentially millions of people are going to have to pay more, which means many, many millions of low-income people are not going to have access to health care. I mean, that's basically it.
Huge move by the president, and really in the dark of the night.
I'm not sure what time.
To scrap the subsidies.
I was already in bed when it happened. I got the news alert this morning.
There you go. Look,
it happened late last night.
But the administration has been saying all along, very parallel to what they've said about the Dreamers, which is there are certain things which require congressional action. Obama, by executive decision, was giving away $7 billion with no appropriation. And the administration has said, you know, Trump didn't go out and do an executive order and fund the wall because it would have been illegal. So he's had to hang around trying to get Congress to fund the wall. Well, he's applying the same rule here. This means that the work of Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray to try to develop a bipartisan approach suddenly becomes crucial. But I don't think it's unfair to say to the Congress, under the Constitution, it's your job to appropriate money. Figure it out.
Well, that's what a court decided as well,
Right.
because the House of Representatives sued the Obama administration, and a federal court out of Washington, D.C. Said exactly what the speaker just said, that you can't take money out of the Treasury unless it's appropriated by Congress. And essentially, the Obama administration appealed. The House of Representatives asked for a hold on that appeal because they wanted to allow the Trump administration in Congress to work out changes in Obamacare. Obviously, that didn't happen, and that's where the Trump administration is now.
Do you remember the day that, and it was very early on in her tenure, in fact, I think she was still in interim status, Sarah Sanders stood at that lectern in the White House press briefing room and called upon Congress just to simply do their jobs. And you just, you know, you heard the president say in Congress they forget what their pledges were. Constipation in Congress, and I realize it's the noon hour,
It sounds so right.
is not something new. But having a president say, get over it and get things moving, not to further that metaphor, It has to happen now. And so, you know, we potentially could see the Iran deal put in the hands of Congress with 60 days to go. I hope they do their jobs and get done what they need to do and review it.
And the potential to see lawsuits, Marie,
Yes.
in the wake of this. I spoke with Senator Ted Cruz this morning on America's Newsroom. Here's what he had to say on the states suing.
There may be lawsuits, but they're not going to win.
All right.
In fact, there has been a lawsuit against the Obama administration where the court ruled that the payments to the insurance companies were contrary to law. So the lawsuits, the Democrats are blowing smoke if they say they're going to sue.
All right. Marie.
I think you will see lawsuits, and the lawsuit that both the senator and Lisa mentioned was continuing to go through the process. The Supreme Court certainly hadn't taken a look at it yet. What's interesting, though, is a number of policy experts I've been looking at this morning believe that this move could drive up costs for average Americans and also in general for taxpayers, which I think all of us probably agree is not a good thing. And so I know why he's trying to push Congress to do something. He's trying to use this as an action-forcing mechanism, but I don't think this was the way to do this. And a lot of Republicans in Congress had been pushing for him to fund these because they knew, and the Speaker might disagree with this, but these Republicans were saying, look, we don't want our constituents to have their costs going up because we can't get our job
Now she's
done.
just causing trouble.
No. Look, I think that's a very simple, and it's almost funny when you think of the rhetoric of the left. The Trump administration believes this is illegal, that the Congress has to appropriate the money.
Right.
So all the Democrats are going to jump up and down and scream, ought to get to work with the Republicans, and they ought to appropriate the money. It's not hard.
But if costs go up, Republicans own it.
All right.
Well, if the cost goes up, I think the Congress is going to own it because they will have
There you
failed
go.
to do their job.
We've got to
Figure out
leave
how
it
to do
there.
it.
We are just minutes away now from President Trump's announcement on the Iran nuclear deal as he lays out a high-stakes strategy on dealing with the regime. Plus, new details on the disaster in California after the deadliest week of wildfires in that state's history. And White House Chief of Staff John Kelly facing down the media, denying reports that he's quitting or getting fired. So was it a good move to put General Kelly front and center? We debate.
Fox News Alert, we are awaiting the moment of truth from President Trump. He said on the campaign trail a year ago or more that he would have a situation where he would deal with that Iran deal. And now, today, he is. He's going to decertify. That's what we are being told. And what that means is we don't completely pull out of it, but we sure change a lot of it. And we put some things on the table that Iran will not be happy about, no doubt. So how will they react? How will those allies, that P5 who came together with us in July of 2015, how will those other countries react today when the president moves ahead with his agenda and with his vision on how to deal with Iran? We'll cover that when he steps up to the lectern with his speech in moments. And Fox News Alert now, at least 31 people are dead. That number is rising with hundreds more missing as wildfires rage in Northern California. So far, we've seen entire neighborhoods wiped out. It's left first responders with the grim task of searching through the rubble of so many homes.
There have been IDs in this case in a pile of ash and bones where there was a piece of metal left from somebody's surgery, like a hip replacement, with an ID number on it, and that helped us ID the person. So I'm sorry to have to tell you that, but that is what we're faced with in this fire as far as identifying people and recovering people.
Will Carr is live in Napa, California with the latest. Will?
Harris, more fierce winds set to sweep across this area this weekend. Bad news for firefighters. But here in Santa Rosa, we're starting to see signs of resiliency. Somebody came up and put an American flag on this Dodge Ram pickup truck that burnt to the ground. And as we're talking, authorities are bringing cadaver dogs through neighborhoods just like this, trying to see if there's any more bodies. And it's not an easy task. When you take a wide look, you can see just how big of an undertaking this is. And they're having to go home by home. At least 31 people dead, but more than 400 still missing. And while the search continues, there's concerns over looters. 5 people arrested yesterday. Officers tell us they actually caught one man trying to break into a gun safe that remarkably made it through this place. And then we're hearing more stories of survival, including the married couple that jumped into their neighbor's pool. They held on to each other for dear life as everything around them burned down. And then there's the mom who said that she was driving through the gates of hell with her kids trying to get out of here. And they're just thankful everybody survived. and is all right today. Harris.
Well, I tell you, those pictures they just speak to, it looks like a wasteland out there. We pray for the people in California as they get through this fire season. Will Carr, thank you.
That it is.
Do you remember when White House Chief of Staff John Kelly stepped into the White House press briefing room yesterday? He had strong words for the media at that briefing, saying President Trump is frustrated with the way many reporters cover his administration. And so is he.
My only frustration, with all due respect to everyone in the room, is when I come to work in the morning and read about things I allegedly said or things that Mr. Trump allegedly said or people who were going to be fired or whatever, and it's just not true. That's my frustration. I mean no disrespect to you all. It is astounding to me how much is misreported. I will give you the benefit of the doubt that you are operating off of contacts, leaks, whatever you call them. But I would just offer to you the advice I'd say, maybe develop some better sources.
General Kelly also shut down the notion that his job is somehow to control the president.
I read in the paper, well, you all know, you write it, that I've been a failure at controlling the president, or a failure at controlling his tweeting and all that. I was not sent in, or I was not brought to this job to control anything but the flow of information to our president, so that he can make the best decisions. I was not sent into or brought in to control him, and you should not measure my effectiveness as a chief of staff by what you think I should be doing.
First of all, the chief of staff walking to the White House press briefing room, that doesn't normally happen. That was a big moment.
Well, it was very interesting because you also had General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, say in the last 24 hours that the reports about President Trump and nuclear weapons are totally false. So you've had two four-star Marine generals, very distinguished people, saying to the national news media, what you're doing is false. This is not Trump. This is not Steve Bannon. These are guys who have served their country for 40 years and who are telling the country that they are being badly served by the elite media. And I think in Kelly's case, he did it with a good sense of humor. And he also told the truth. Look, he's chief of staff. He's not chief of president.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would add to the mix, though, and I'm wondering where the mainstream media are kind of going with this. The narrative that formed around Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and him having to get up to the lectern last week and say, I, too, am not leaving, in a roundabout way, also putting down some of the messaging and the stories that had been in the media, too. He did not deny calling the president a name, but he said this is just petty, let's move on. And then within a week's time, you have more staff members. I mean, you just mentioned the two generals getting up and saying, no, we're going forward. Nobody's leaving. What do you make of that drumbeat? And does the White House now need to or need to stop responding to this? Because these people are going to say what they're going to say.
No, I think I think the country, and you see this in terms of polling about the media, I think the country increasingly believes there is fake news. I think, I tell audiences all the time, particularly if they're hostile to Trump, how would you know? I mean, well, the information you're getting is from people who hate him. Well, and that's exactly what you just had. I mean, I think the fact you have, Tillerson, who ran ExxonMobil, you have two four-star Marine generals, all three basically saying the same thing, ought to say to the news media, it ain't Trump who has to think through what he's doing. It is you guys who are, in fact, disserving the country by your pettiness, by your exaggerations. Big things, right? We're talking about big things in the show today.
And thirst for a narrative, it would appear.
Yeah.
So Kelly spoke a lot about the media in that moment yesterday, but he also talked about how the president has the right to defend himself against critics within his own party. Listen.
When members of Congress say things that are unfair or critical, the president has a right to defend himself. When I read about things that are what I would perceive to be unfair or critical, unnecessarily critical, I will call members of Congress and just ask, is there anything I can do to help you with that misconception you have, or maybe explain to you why I did this or that?
Lisa?
Well, I don't like infighting within the party personally, and I do think sometimes picking fights with your own party is a disservice when you're trying to get things done like tax reform. But to the Speaker's point, I think the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, going out there, someone who has so greatly served our country in so many different capacities, that message is not just to the media, it's to the Americans that are watching the press briefing, because I really think that it's going to make them sit back and think, what information am I being fed? And you can go through and point to so many examples of fake news, whether it was the CNN story about Anthony Scaramucci, CNN reporting that Comey was going to say that he never told President Trump that he wasn't under investigation. That turned out to not be true when Comey submitted his written statement. Just the day after they were saying it on Tuesday night. There was a Washington Post article about some alleged confrontation between John Kelly when he was then DHS secretary and Steve Bannon. And John Kelly said, I was never even there. It is pure fantasy. So I do think that Trump has a leg to stand on when he says fake news.
Marie? So the challenge is the president uses that term every time there's a story he doesn't like. So he uses it all the time. And he talks about the press in a way that, honestly, I'm uncomfortable with the way he talks about the First Amendment, with the press. You know, I worked for an administration that I encouraged to come, for example, on Fox News and appear. And if Barack Obama had said half of what Donald Trump has said about NBC, about our network that we love, I think people here would have been very upset. So I want President Trump to dial the rhetoric down. If there are stories that are wrong, there are ways to get at that. But you cannot use this blanket fake news going after the First Amendment. I am deeply, deeply uncomfortable with that. I really am.
Would you concede the fact, though, that there has been so much negativity against this president, far more so than what we saw with Barack Obama? I mean, I haven't seen any Democrats who won't agree with that I've talked with. I'm just curious if you see that side of the facts.
We'll leave you pondering that thought. We are awaiting that big announcement from President Trump that he will not recertify the Iran nuclear deal in a major foreign policy shift. Congress will then get 60 days to decide what to do, what their options are, and what it means for our national security.
We're awaiting that announcement from President Trump on the Iran nuclear deal. We're told the president is not going to recertify it and will outline why the 2015 accord is not in our national interests. The president also is not scrapping that deal entirely, as we've been telling you this hour, but it will be up to Congress to decide what's next. They'll have about 60 days to do that. And they have three options, by the way. They can decide to do nothing and live up to the commitment under the deal. Remember, there's some side things on that, though, we might want to take a look at. They can choose to reimpose sanctions, putting the agreement in question. Or they can amend the nuclear deal to put in place some very firm trigger points. If Iran crosses those points, the sanctions would automatically be reimposed. The trigger points would be specific to the nuclear program itself, but also deal with things like Iran's ballistic missile program. All right, we're back with our panel. And as we await the president, let's also bring in Chris Steyerwalt, Fox News political editor, who's often along for the ride on these breaking news points. Chris, always good to have you.
Howdy.
Let's just talk a little bit about the president stepping up now and the anticipated audience. I mentioned Iran. They're already saying through their foreign minister, they're angry. They don't like the Iranian National Revolutionary Guard will be seen as a terrorist group. There are a whole lot of points here that they see as a reason for them not to stick to the deal.
This is a little bit of brinksmanship here. This is, as you pointed out, the president plotting a middle way through the options that were in front of him. There were many, and including those who listened to him while he was on the campaign trail, that thought that the right choice for the president was to just blow it up, tear up the deal and walk away. Then there were others who said that he should stay the course and not do anything differently than the Obama administration had done. This is him choosing the middle path. The middle path, as you said, kicks it to Congress and basically says, particularly to Tom Cotton and a handful of other senators who have taken a hard line on this, okay, let's see what you can get. Let's see what you can get out of this. Can you get a better deal? Can you bring greater scrutiny to bear on Iran?
Yeah, it kicks them to a group that I've called this hour the most constipated political people on the planet. I think I put it like that. But you know who could get a deal is the former House Speaker who's sitting to my left here. And Chris, I'm wondering if the two of you might have a conversation on moving forward and making those 60 days count. Speaker, I want to come to you on that.
Well, I mean, my advice would be to make the initial hearings about the total Iranian relationship and to look at things Congress might want to do that deal with the totality of the Iranian offensive, which runs all the way to Lebanon now. And I think is a very serious crisis for the future of the Middle East. I think that's actually better than narrowing down to just look at the nuclear agreement.
Mm-hmm. And it gives you some places, too. I mean, you talk about, Chris, dealing with the ballistic missiles and Americans who've been taken hostage. And I mean, there are a whole host of issues that are outside this deal. And then, as I mentioned, Lisa, the side deals, the parts that we don't know that are there.
Right. I think there's a lot of questions, and that's why I said I think kicking this to Congress, having some further review. I mean, you go through and you look at whether it's Hezbollah attacking the Israelis, whether you look at the Houthis in Yemen, you look at the pro-Assad forces are 80%. Yeah, those are all Iranian proxies. So I think basically the difference between the Trump administration and the Obama administration is he wants to have a more comprehensive strategy in dealing with Iran and putting this all on the table.
So, Chris, you know, we've covered days like this. What is the kind of ramp up to this kind of a speech today? We've heard reports that the president has been talking with hosts of advisors on this. We know members of Congress have weighed in on this. His generals have weighed in on this. What does it look like to get ready for this moment?
He has been intensely lobbied on this subject, perhaps more than any other, certainly since the Paris Climate Accord and his step back from that. He's been getting it from all sides, people wanting him to do it all, right? And that people always want bold, broad, immediate solutions. We live in an immediate gratification society. They want immediate results from the president. The president today basically has to make the case, and they've been ramping up to making a case that says, look, this is the better way forward. And also, by the way, it's a safe way forward. Americans are concerned, rightly concerned, about what happens in the Middle East that spirals out of control after the Muslim Arab Spring, after the new rebalancing between Sunni and Shia. Things have been unsteady and unstable in that region for a long time. And the president needs to reassure them this is a reasonable choice that we are taking to step forward, not just to punish Iran or have a fight with Iran, but instead that this will make us more secure and the region more stable.
Marie, you know this deal inside and out.
Yes.
You have to be having some very strong thoughts as we await the president.
I do. And it took so long to get this deal, and it took so much negotiation that if Congress does the right thing here by keeping the deal in place, sure, pass sanctions on ballistic missiles, pass sanctions on terrorism. What I am looking for Congress to do is keep the nuclear deal in place, make sure it's implemented to the 150th percent so we know every T is crossed and every I is dotted. But if we do something in the United States Congress to pull the United States out of a deal that is today preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, that will have such severe consequences that yes, I was involved with it, and that bothers me, but as an American, I am very concerned about
the consequences is what many are concerned about as we await this announcement. How do you expect Iran to respond to this?
Well, I think it depends on what Congress does. Honestly, they will say a lot of things in the press today because they have their own domestic politics. We need to focus on what they actually do. So it depends on what Congress does. And if the United States Congress puts our country out of compliance with our requirements, then we are going to get blamed not just by Iran but by our allies, like the United Kingdom.
But do you think that, because sometimes when you work on something so much, I mean, do you think that you are too tied to this to be able to objectively step back and look at the deal?
It's a good question. There are things I worked on in the Obama administration.
And I mean that with respect.
I know you do. No. There are things I worked on in the Obama administration that I would criticize, and I have criticized on this couch. This one, I truly believe that we got the best deal we could get that prevents them from getting a nuclear weapon.
Right.
And we can talk about the 15 years and 20 years. That is a fair question to have that discussion about when certain provisions end.
I want to remind our audience real quickly where we are now. So we had been given kind of a timetable when the president would be speaking. We are now within that window. So if we get a 2-minute warning, we will jump to the president. I want to bring Chris Stirewalt and the speaker back into the conversation. Earlier this week, House Democrats asked to meet with former Obama administration officials, the three tenors, if you will, of the people who put together the deal from our life, from our perspective. Secretary of State John Kerry, Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz, and former Treasury Secretary Jack Lew. So they wanted to meet and talk about legacy points. What is the significance, Speaker, of doing that, and how does that maybe inform us of what this would look like in Congress going forward, or does it?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, I think it's totally legitimate for the Democratic leadership to say about a Democratic presidency, would your experts come in and brief us and let us know how you see this thing evolving and what's your advice as we go forward? And I think that's totally appropriate, and I would hope that when and I think Senator Corker certainly would have this inclination, that if they do move forward first to hearings and lay things out, that you're going to want to have Secretary Kerry there. You're going to want to have various people there because you want their opinion. This is an important enough and a dangerous enough thing that you'd like both sides, both Republicans and Democrats,